If you had to distill the massive undertaking of building the Indian state into a single foundational text, you'd be left with our Constitution.
Right.
But here's the paradox. Is it a masterpiece of original thought, or is it merely a hodgepodge of borrowed ideas? Is it static, rigid, or is it wildly flexible? We're diving headfirst into the magnificent contradictions and paradoxes that make this foundational document truly unique in the world.
It really is. It's the text that establishes the fundamental law of the land, providing both the structure of governance and the philosophical blueprint for our society.
And yet it's constantly evolving, constantly adapting.
Exactly. Understanding its salient features, the precise characteristics that define it, is not just academic. It is absolutely key to decoding the entire Indian political system and grasping the core challenges of administration.
Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we transform complex sources. Today, we are unpacking the insights from M. Laxmikanth's Indian Polity, 8th edition, Chapter 4, into crystal clear, distilled knowledge for you, the well-informed learner preparing for what comes next.
And, before we jump in, we want to acknowledge and give a huge shout out to all our existing members. Your dedicated support is just invaluable.
It really is.
It helps us immensely in bringing this kind of super useful, high-detail content to life week after week. So thank you for being a part of the Simplified UPSC by PPP family.
And if you find this deep dive valuable, and we're pretty confident you will, given the intricacies we are about to explore, please consider supporting us. We're humbly requesting you to subscribe to the channel right now.
Yep, just click that button.
And if you're able, join our paid membership here on YouTube. Your support really does ensure we can keep delivering these detailed analyses.
Oh, and don't forget to like this video and share your valuable comment. It truly helps the mission and the growth of our learning community.
Absolutely.
One quick note on resources for your preparation. You can access free notes with practice PYQs related to this chapter and many others on our Telegram channel. The link for that is waiting for you in the description.
And for our most committed learners, those ready for the next level of structured preparation, premium notes, extra PYQs, and model mains answers for mains questions are available on our dedicated Discord channel for Legend YouTube members.
That's where the high-level synthesis and application really happens, so do join us there.
Okay, so today's mission, a deep dive into the salient features of the Constitution.
We are going to meticulously distill the characteristics that set the Indian polity apart, keeping a sharp focus on UPSC relevance, constitutional articles, key amendments, and of course their direct linkage to previous year's questions.
All right, let's unpack this monumental document, starting with its sheer physical presence. The most obvious feature of the Indian Constitution is that it is the lengthiest written constitution in the world.
By a long shot.
Yeah. When it started, it had 395 articles and 22 parts and 8 schedules. Today, it contains roughly 470 articles and 25 parts and 12 schedules, and that's factoring in all the additions from over 100 amendments.
The contrast is truly staggering when you look globally. Compare that to the American Constitution.
Which is famously brief.
Incredibly brief. Just 7 articles, and it's only seen 27 amendments in over 200 years. The sheer volume of the Indian document, it forces you to ask why. Why did the framers feel the need for such detail?
Exactly. It wasn't accidental. It wasn't just wordiness. So what were the factors that compelled the Constituent Assembly to create such a massive, detailed text?
Well, there are 4 primary factors driving this volume. First, and perhaps most importantly, is the geographical and historical context of India.
The diversity.
The immense diversity, linguistic, regional, social, economic. The Constitution had to provide really detailed solutions and structural accommodations to manage all of that and ensure national unity.
And it was also drawing on a pre-existing, very detailed document, right?
Precisely. It drew heavily from the Government of India Act of 1935, which was itself a very bulky piece of legislation.
Okay, so that's one. What's the second factor?
The second is the federal structure we adopted. It required a very detailed definition. Unlike some federations where conventions sort of govern the center-state relationship, our Constitution had to lay out elaborate provisions for everything.
Like what, specifically?
Well, from the allocation of legislative powers in Articles 245 to 255, to the financial relationships, to the mechanisms for resolving conflicts, nothing was left to chance.
Got it. And the third factor?
The third relates to the philosophical components. We didn't just establish a government, we were setting a blueprint for a welfare state.
So not just the how, but the why.
Exactly. And that meant incorporating these exhaustive sections like the justiciable fundamental rights in Part 3 and the non-justiciable directive principles of state policy in Part 4. These aren't just high-level principles, they are detailed instructions for state action.
Okay. And the fourth?
The fourth factor is that the Constitution contains detailed guidelines for state administration, not just for the center.
So it goes down to the state level.
All the way down. It includes explicit provisions for specific categories of people and areas, like what you find in the 5th and 6th schedules for scheduled and tribal areas.
That level of detail, it must be there to reduce ambiguity, right? To prevent local political experiments from, undermining the national interest.
That's the core idea. That detail orientation is precisely what makes the Constitution indispensable for administrators. It defines the functions, boundaries, and responsibilities of the Union, the states, and even local governments. It's a complete operational manual, not just a framework.
This detail orientation then brings us to that famous moniker, the ransacked Constitution, or the bag of borrowings. I find Dr. B.R. Ambedkar's statement on this, his proud claim that the Constitution was framed after ransacking all the known constitutions of the world. So illuminating.
He really is.
It highlights not a lack of originality, but a highly pragmatic intellectual process.
Absolutely. You have to remember the context. The framers were operating under immense pressure, tight timelines, right after independence and partition.
The last thing they had time for was inventing a whole new system from scratch.
Right. So instead, they adopted a strategy of selective appropriation. They looked to established global constitutional systems, identified the features that worked successfully in managing a democracy, and then critically adapted them to the unique requirements of India.
So let's break down that ransacking into its three core components. You have the structure, the philosophy, and the political machinery.
Okay. The structural part, the administrative scaffolding, the real nuts and bolts of how the government functions, that is overwhelmingly derived from the Government of India Act of 1935.
The British Act that was already in place.
It was already there, providing a ready-made blueprint for things like the federal scheme, the office of the governor, the powers of the federal judiciary, public service commissions, a huge chunk of the administrative setup.
Okay, so that's the skeleton. Now, moving to the philosophical core, which is where the aspirations for freedom and social justice live, where do we look for inspiration on individual rights?
The fundamental rights in Part 3 draw their primary conceptual strength from the American Constitution's Bill of Rights.
The idea of justiciable rights against the state.
Exactly, that guarantee of rights against state overreach. However, the framers intentionally made them less absolute than the U.S. model. They permitted reasonable restrictions based on public order, morality, and security.
And what about the other side of that coin, the aspirational side? The directive principles of state policy, aiming for socioeconomic justice.
That was directly inspired by the Spanish and Irish examples, specifically the Irish Constitution of 1937, which had similar guiding principles for the state.
Okay, and finally, the political part. The actual machinery of government.
That, the cabinet government system and the principle of ministerial responsibility, is largely drawn from the British Constitution. This was a mechanism we were already familiar with through colonial rule, and it was formalized to ensure accountability of the executive to the legislature.
But the borrowings didn't stop with the big three, the UK, US, and Ireland. We imported significant concepts from all over the globe.
We really did. The idea of a strong center and federalism with a unitary bias came from Canada.
And the concurrent list.
That was borrowed from Australia to facilitate central-state cooperation in areas where they both have legislative interest.
You can see the pragmatism in every choice.
It's everywhere. Germany influenced our emergency provisions, which reflects a necessary focus on national integrity. The concepts of justice in the preamble and the fundamental duties, though added later, were inspired by the Constitution of the former USSR.
Even procedural things, right?
Yep. The procedure for amendment came from South Africa, and the procedure established by law from Japan. This synthesis wasn't mere imitation, it was highly contextualized engineering.
Which is the ultimate rebuttal to that hodgepodge criticism.
It is. The framers modified these features to fit India's unique socioeconomic, linguistic, and regional complexities. That's not copying, that's smart design.
This is where the genius of the framers truly shines, creating a structure that is both firm and malleable. The Indian Constitution is fundamentally defined by its unique synthesis of rigidity and sliceability. It is neither purely rigid, like the American Constitution, nor purely flexible, like the British system, which can change its fundamental laws through just ordinary parliamentary legislation.
That balance is absolutely critical. A rigid constitution, it risks stagnation. It can't respond to social and technological change.
And a totally flexible one.
That risks instability. It allows the ruling party way too much power to fundamentally alter the system on a whim.
So India needed a framework that was stable, yet could facilitate massive social engineering.
Exactly. Things like land reform, economic liberalization, or the creation of new states, you need a document that can bend without breaking.
And this amendability paradox is handled masterfully through three distinct methods, established partly within Article 368 and partly outside of it.
Right. So the first and least demanding category covers provisions that can be amended by a simple majority of Parliament.
This is just like passing a regular law.
Pretty much. These changes are treated like ordinary legislation and are technically not categorized under Article 368 as constitutional amendments.
And what kind of things fall under this?
Mostly minor administrative changes, the admission or establishment of new states under Article 2, the formation of new states or alteration of boundaries under Article 3, or, changes to the salaries and allowances of Parliament members.
Simple stuff. Okay, what's the second method?
The second, and this is the one used for the majority of constitutional provisions, is amendment by a special majority of Parliament as explicitly laid out in Article 368.
And what does special majority mean in this context?
For this, you need two things. A majority of the total membership of each house, and a majority of not less than 2/3 of the members present and voting.
So it's a high bar.
It's a very high bar. And this process is required for fundamental aspects like fundamental rights, the directive principles of state policy, and any provision not covered by the other two methods. It prevents casual tinkering with the core of the Constitution.
Okay, and the third mechanism is the most challenging one, right? It's reserved for things that affect the federal balance.
Precisely. This requires a special majority of Parliament PLUS ratification by not less than half of the state legislatures by a simple majority.
So you need the center and the states to agree.
You do. This level of consent is mandated for changes concerning the federal structure. Things like the manner of election of the president, the extent of the executive power of the union and the states, or the representation of states in Parliament.
A great recent example of this would be the GST Council, right? Under Article 279 DAC.
A perfect example. It fundamentally restructured center-state financial relations, and it required ratification by at least 15 states. This shows why that third path is so essential for preserving the federal spirit, even with the unitary bias we have.
This capacity for structured amendment ties directly into practical governance challenges that you see all the time in previous year's questions.
It really does. Take PYQ Ch4 concerning the food security bill. The constitutional flexibility allows a policy born from the directive principles, Article 47, to be enacted on a massive scale.
It provides the legal and financial framework needed to actually deliver on those goals.
Exactly. Even if it requires significant constitutional maneuvering to manage resources and distribution.
Similarly, if you think about the impact of liberalization, which came up in PYQ Q.7, large-scale economic policy changes, they inevitably clash with established constitutional boundaries. The existence of a clear amendment procedure and the restraint imposed by judicial review means that economic reforms have to be constitutionally legitimate.
They can't violate fundamental rights arbitrarily. It forces the government to constantly balance economic urgency with constitutional guarantees, like the expanded right to livelihood under Article 21.
So the Constitution acts as a system of effective restraints.
Yes, even on necessary policy shifts. It ensures change happens within a stable, predictable framework.
Moving from flexibility, we now encounter the complex nature of our political structure. A unique blend of federal and unitary features, often termed quasi-federal.
Right.
Article 1 sets the tone by describing India as a union of states, rather than a federation of states. Why was that specific wording so important to the framers?
That phrase, union of states, carries immense constitutional significance. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar explained, and it implies two crucial things.
Okay.
First, the Indian Federation is not the result of an agreement among the constituent states, unlike the American Federation, which was formed by states voluntarily joining together.
So we didn't agree to form a country, we just were one.
In a sense, yes. And second, and this is fundamentally important, no state has the right to secede from the Union is indestructible.
The British political scientist K.C. were famously labeled the Indian structure as quasi-federal, and we do have the core federal features: a dual polity, a written constitution, supremacy of the constitution, division of powers.
We tick all those boxes. However, it's the unitary or non-federal features that really give the center its dominant strength and justify that quasi-federal label.
Let's list a few. First, the strong center. The Union list contains all the critical subjects: defense, foreign affairs, currency, communications, and the residual powers are all with the center.
Second, the single constitution, which applies uniformly across the Union and the states, ensuring administrative coherence.
And third, single citizenship. We're all citizens of India, not of our states. This is meant to reinforce national identity.
Fourth, the integrated judiciary structure, ensuring a consistent application of both central and state laws across the entire country.
And then you have the crucial administrative controls. The All India Services, IAS, IPS, IFOS, recruited by the center, but posted in the states.
That gives the center a deep administrative reach into state affairs. Furthermore, the appointment of the state governor by the center ensures that the center maintains a constitutional check, as the governor acts as an agent and reports to the president.
So all of this culminates in what you call an indestructible union of destructible states.
That's the ultimate expression of the unitary bias. Unlike American states, which have guaranteed territorial integrity, the Indian Parliament can unilaterally change the area, boundaries, or name of any state.
And it can do that with just a simple majority under Article 3.
By a simple majority, yes.
So if the center can unilaterally destroy or modify the constitutional boundaries of the states, doesn't that compromise the very spirit of federalism entirely? Is our federalism perhaps just a facade designed for administrative convenience?
That's the core debate, and it's a necessary one. While critics like Ware certainly believed the unitary features outweighed the federal ones, the framers argued that such powers were essential for maintaining the nation's integrity.
Especially with the demands for linguistic reorganization after independence.
Exactly. Look at the Jammu and Kashmir Reorganization Act of 2019, which bifurcated the state into two union territories. That was a profound, unprecedented exercise of Parliament's power under Article 3.
It demonstrated that when the national interest is deemed paramount, the unitary nature takes precedence.
It absolutely does. And the power isn't just theoretical, it's constantly exercised. Even less dramatic examples, like the 100th Constitutional Amendment Act of 2015 for the exchange of territories with Bangladesh, involved modifying state boundaries and required parliamentary action.
It ensures the country remains one cohesive political unit.
And if the unitary bias is the rule, then the emergency provisions are the unique constitutional mechanism that allows the entire structure to flip.
Seamlessly, from quasi-federal to purely unitary.
Yes, without needing a formal amendment.
This ability to transform the system overnight is perhaps the most unique aspect, designed to safeguard sovereignty and stability. So what are the three triggers?
First, the national emergency under Article 352, which is triggered by war, external aggression, or armed rebellion.
And when this is proclaimed, the center takes total control.
Total control. Parliament can legislate on any subject in the state list, and the Union's executive power extends to giving directions to the states on any matter. The polity fundamentally becomes a unitary state.
Okay, second.
Second, the state emergency, or what's commonly known as President's Rule, under Article 356 or 365. This is triggered by the failure of the constitutional machinery in a state, or the state's failure to comply with directions from the center.
And third is the financial emergency.
Under Article 360, declared when the financial stability or credit of India is threatened. This allows the center to dictate fiscal policies, even ordering the reduction of salaries of state or union employees.
The impact on rights during an emergency is immense.
Huge. Although the 44th Amendment Act of 1978 did ensure that rights under Articles 20 and 21, protection against conviction and protection of life and liberty, can never be suspended.
But the 6 freedoms under Article 19 are automatically suspended during a national emergency proclaimed due to war or external aggression.
Correct. This capacity for concentrated power directly intersects with internal security challenges, which is a crucial area for administration, and links to PYQs, Q.8, and Q.25.
Right. When we look at issues like left-wing extremism, The constitutional mechanism of special provisions for scheduled areas in the Fifth Schedule is supposed to provide local autonomy and protection.
It's supposed to, but the PYQ implies that the failure to implement these provisions, failure in land reform, resource management, and administration in tribal areas, is what leads to deep-seated alienation and the rise of extremism.
So a governance failure at the state level destabilizes the region.
Precisely, and that instability then compels the central government to utilize its unitary powers, deploying central armed forces or potentially imposing president's rule to restore order.
So the constitutional feature designed to accommodate diversity, when it fails, forces a reliance on the Constitution's unitary bias to maintain security.
It's a fascinating and often tragic cycle, especially in regions near long, porous borders, which are inherently vulnerable.
Let's shift now to the chosen structure for the organs of government. The parliamentary form of government, which we adopted from the British system. This choice firmly rooted the principle of cabinet government, where the executive is responsible to the legislature.
And this established the system of ministerial responsibility, distinguishing between the ceremonial head and the real executive.
So we have the nominal executive, the president at the center, the governor in the state, and the real executive, which is the prime minister or chief minister and their council of ministers.
Yes, and Article 74 mandates that the Council of Ministers, headed by the PM, must aid and advise the president, and that advice is binding.
The key features that define this responsibility are things like majority party rule, collective responsibility to the lower house, political homogeneity, and the necessity of double membership.
Double membership meaning ministers must also be members of the legislature.
Right. And of course, the system is characterized by the leadership of the prime minister or chief minister and the power of dissolution of the lower house.
But despite drawing so heavily from the UK model, we must stress the clear distinction between the Indian and British models. We did not simply copy and paste.
The differences are profound.
They really are. First, politically, India is a republican system. Our head of state, the president, is indirectly elected for a fixed term. The UK, of course, retains a hereditary monarchy.
And second, and this is the foundational difference that limits the power of our government, the Indian Parliament is not supreme.
This is the crucial point. The power it holds is limited and restricted.
And that limitation stems from four major factors: a detailed written constitution, a federal system, the existence of fundamental rights,
and crucially, the power of judicial review. The British system operates under the doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty. Parliament can theoretically pass any law it chooses. Ours simply cannot.
And the Parliament's limited power is fundamentally guarded by the courts, which brings us perfectly to the other pillar, the integrated and independent judiciary. We inherited this integrated system from the Government of India Act of 1935.
This is a departure from the U.S. model, which has a dual system: federal courts for federal laws, state courts for state laws. In India, we have a single integrated hierarchy.
The Supreme Court at the top, high courts below it, and then subordinate courts.
And this unified structure is crucial for ensuring consistency and uniformity in the enforcement of both central and state laws across our diverse union.
And central to the judiciary's capacity to restrain Parliament is its power of judicial review.
This is the judiciary's sentinel function. It's the power of the Supreme Court and high courts to declare any law or executive order as void or ultra vires if they are found to contravene constitutional provisions.
And to exercise this power effectively, the judiciary has to be independent.
It must be. The Constitution ensures this through critical safeguards: a complex mode of appointment, the collegium system fixed tenure, and expenses charged on the Consolidated Fund of India, which insulates them from political pressure.
But the ultimate source of the judiciary's restraining power isn't just judicial review. It's the basic structure doctrine, which is a critical piece of constitutional history.
That's a necessary clarification for a deep dive. The doctrine arose from the landmark Kesavananda Bharati case in 1973. The Supreme Court ruled that while Parliament can amend the Constitution under Article 368, it cannot alter the basic structure.
The fundamental features of the Constitution.
Things like judicial review itself, federalism, secularism, the rule of law. This doctrine acts as an inherent, unamendable restriction on Parliament's power, cementing the judiciary as the ultimate interpreter and protector of the Constitution.
And a prominent recent illustration of the judiciary defending its institutional structure through judicial review was the Fourth Judges case in 2015.
Right. The Supreme Court struck down the National Judicial Appointments Commission, NJAC Act, and the 99th Constitutional Amendment.
Why?
The court argued that the new system, which gave the executive a say in judicial appointments, would fundamentally compromise the independence of the judiciary, which is part of the basic structure.
So by declaring the amendment void, the court reinstated the collegium system.
It did. It was a powerful showcase of the judiciary's willingness to use its power to protect its own institutional integrity and the separation of powers.
Now we delve into the heart of the Indian social and political philosophy, starting with the triad of rights and duties. First, the fundamental rights, FRs, in Part 3.
The justiciable rights guaranteed against arbitrary state action, enforceable in a court of law.
These are extensive, guaranteeing the civil and political freedoms necessary for a democratic society.
And we must remember that while many key rights, like Article 21, are available to all persons, citizens, or foreigners, core rights, like the 6 freedoms under Article 19, are specifically reserved only for citizens.
Let's look at the bedrock. Equality before law under Article 14 and protection against discrimination under Article 15. How have these evolved recently?
Well, Articles 15 and 16 have seen significant changes, notably with the 103rd Amendment Act of 2019.
This introduced the EWS reservation.
Yes, it introduced provisions allowing special measures and reservations for economically weaker sections, up to 10% in educational institutions and public employment. This shows the Constitution's capacity to address new forms of inequality.
And Article 19 guarantees the 6 freedom, speech, assembly, association, and so on. It's also a crucial reminder that the original right to property was here, but was famously stripped away.
Yes, by the 44th Amendment Act of 1978, which converted it into a mere legal right under Article 300A.
But the article that has seen the most dramatic, dynamic expansion through judicial interpretation, reflecting that commitment to a welfare state, has to be Article 21.
Oh, absolutely. Protection of life and personal liberty. This is where the judiciary has completely redefined what life actually means.
The expansion is immense. Following the Maneka Gandhi case in 1978, the Supreme Court established that procedure established by law must be fair, just, and reasonable, basically due process.
And that opened the door for Article 21 to encompass a vast array of implicit rights. Such as the right to live with human dignity, the right to a decent environment, the right to health, and the foundational right to livelihood.
And most recently, the right to privacy.
Yes, in the Puttaswamy case of 2017, the court affirmed the right to privacy as an integral and intrinsic part of Article 21. This judicial activism fundamentally transforms the text from a simple procedural safeguard into a comprehensive guarantee of human development.
And the mechanism for defending all these rights is Article 32 itself. The right to constitutional remedies, the right to directly move the Supreme Court, is itself a fundamental right.
Which is why the Supreme Court is legally bound to act as the defender and guarantor of our fundamental rights.
Counterbalancing these justiciable rights, we have the Directive Principles of State Policy, DPSPs, in Part 4. These are the aspirational, non-justiciable goals, the social blueprint.
They are non-justiciable, meaning their enforcement relies on the political will of the government and resource availability, not on a judicial mandate. They represent moral and constitutional obligations on the state to guide them in policy formulation.
And the core goal of the DPSPs is profound: to establish economic and social democracy, to transform India from a colonial police state into a modern welfare state.
And Article 37 is very clear that while non-enforceable, these principles are fundamental in the governance of the country, obligating the state to apply them when making laws.
Yet, precisely because they aren't enforceable, the DPSPs have attracted some severe criticism over the years.
Oh, yes. K.T. Shah, during the Constituent Assembly debates, famously called them pious superfluities and likened them to a check on a bank payable only when the resources of the bank permit.
And T.T. Krishnamurti's description of the directives as a veritable dustbin of sentiments also underscores that frustration.
The historical critique was that aspirational goals without legal teeth were just window dressing, designed to placate people without demanding actual resource commitment.
But the counterargument is that they're politically invaluable.
They are. They provide the necessary democratic pressure and legitimacy for major policy interventions that the state might not otherwise pursue. The successful implementation of principles like securing adequate means of livelihood or promoting public health demonstrates their practical power.
This link is perfectly demonstrated in PYQ Q.8, regarding land reform laws.
Absolutely. The abolition of intermediaries like zamindars, tenancy reforms, imposing ceilings on land holdings, all of these were massive legislative undertakings.
And they were direct manifestations of the state striving to achieve the welfare goals enshrined in the DPSPs.
Yes, specifically promoting economic justice and eliminating poverty. We also see the continued relevance in the 97th Constitutional Amendment Act of 2011, which added a DPSP on the promotion of cooperative societies and made the right to form them a fundamental right.
Showing how the two parts are continuously integrated.
Exactly.
Finally, in this section, we turn to the citizens' responsibilities, the fundamental duties, FDs.
These were added much later in Part 4A through the controversial 42nd Amendment Act in 1976 during the emergency.
Based on the Swaran Singh Committee recommendations.
Right. Initially, there were 10 duties. The 86th Amendment Act of 2002 added the 11th, related to parental duty to provide educational opportunities to children.
What's the core rationale for adding these duties decades after the Constitution was enacted?
Well, they serve as a constant moral reminder to citizens that rights and duties are inseparable. While you enjoy expansive freedoms, you must be conscious of your corresponding duties to the country.
Things like respecting the Constitution, upholding sovereignty, and promoting common brotherhood.
Exactly. And just like the DPSPs, the fundamental duties are non-justiciable, although Parliament can enforce them through appropriate legislation. They set a civic and ethical standard.
Moving beyond that philosophical core, there are several other structural features that define the unique nature of the Indian Republic.
And one we've touched on but deserves its own focus is single citizenship.
We mentioned it in the context of the unitary bias, but adopting it is a profound choice for a federal country.
It's a critical feature distinguishing us from true federations like the USA, where individuals hold dual citizenship of the nation and their specific state.
In India, you're a citizen of India, full stop.
Exactly, regardless of your state of birth or residence. And the deep political implication of this choice is that it's a powerful tool for national integration.
It prevents parochialism.
It does. It promotes a sense of a common Indian identity, overcoming linguistic and regional loyalties.
Next up, the secular state. The term secular was formally added to the preamble by the 42nd Amendment in 1976. But the spirit of secularism was inherent in the original text.
That's the key distinction. Indian secularism is not an import of the Western model, which traditionally mandates a complete separation between state and religion.
Like the U.S. First Amendment.
Right. Indian secularism is often described as a positive or principled distance model. It means the state maintains neutrality and provides equal respect and support to all religions.
And where do we see this principled distance in the Constitution?
You see it in several core fundamental rights. Equality before law, regardless of religion, in Article 14, the prohibition of discrimination on religious grounds in Article 15, the comprehensive freedom of religion in Article 25, and the cultural and educational rights for minorities in Articles 29 and 30.
So the state isn't irreligious, it's impartial.
Precisely.
And finally, the cornerstone of our political democracy, universal adult franchise.
This was a revolutionary decision at the time of the Constitution's framing, granting the right to vote to every adult citizen regardless of wealth, class, gender, or education. That was a radical act of faith in the common person.
And we've even seen this democratic faith deepen over time.
We have. Initially, the voting age was 21. It was subsequently reduced to 18 years by the 61st Amendment Act of 1988.
Broadening the electorate even further.
A significant step toward embracing even wider democratic participation.
Now we move to the section that synthesizes everything we've discussed. Understanding the features is foundational. Seeing how they apply to real-world governance challenges is the core of sophisticated preparation.
Let's start by linking constitutional features to economic policy, using PYQ Q.7. Examining the impact of liberalization on Indian companies and their competition with MNCs.
Liberalization, that shift towards a market economy starting in the early 90s, is a massive policy shift. How does the Constitution mediate this change?
The Constitution provides the necessary framework for this policy evolution, but it simultaneously imposes restraints.
How so?
The feature of judicial review and the expansive nature of fundamental rights, especially the right to livelihood under the judicially interpreted Article 21 Act, as a constant check against arbitrary market policies.
So if a liberalization policy, say, allowing unlimited foreign competition leads to the wholesale destruction of domestic industry and livelihood without fair procedural protection.
The affected parties can approach the judiciary. Exactly. The courts, using judicial review and citing the expanded scope of Article 21, can ensure that economic policies, however beneficial in the long run, adhere to principles of proportionality and reasonability.
That's constitutionalism in action.
It is the mechanism of effective restraints on governmental power, even in the pursuit of economic progress.
Okay, next, let's revisit PYQ Q.4 concerning the Food Security Bill and the tension it creates with WTO commitments. This is a perfect clash between an internal constitutional mandate and external global obligations.
This tension is rooted directly in the directive principles. Article 47 morally compels the Indian state to raise the level of nutrition and public health. This internal constitutional mandate drives the creation of large-scale, resource-intensive domestic policy, like the National Food Security Act.
And the implementation of that act requires massive food procurement and subsidy operations by the government.
And this is where the clash with the WTO agreement on agriculture arises. International trade rules, particularly those governing subsidies, often conflict with the volume and scale of procurement needed to fulfill the constitutional duty defined in the DPSP.
So the Indian government has to constantly argue that its internal constitutional mandate for a welfare state takes precedence over external trade obligations.
Which showcases the far reach of constitutional features right into international diplomacy.
Finally, let's synthesize the federal unitary tension with internal security, using the context of tribal areas from PYQs 8 and 25.
Okay. The failure to effectively implement the provisions for scheduled areas in the fifth schedule, particularly concerning land reforms and resource control, creates a governance deficit.
And that deficit, where laws intended to protect tribal rights are ineffective, leads to the alienation implied in the PYQ.
And that alienation then provides fertile ground for the growth of left-wing extremism. This extremism directly threatens internal security, especially near long, porous borders, which then triggers the response mechanism built into the Constitution.
The central government then relies on its dominant, unitary powers deployment of central forces, administrative directions, or even the threat of president's rule to manage the crisis.
It's a cycle that proves that while the Constitution is designed to accommodate diversity through federal features, the failure to govern effectively within those features inevitably requires a retreat to the Constitution's strong unitary bias to maintain the integrity of the nation.
While the efficacy of the Constitution is undeniable, it's vital to conclude by acknowledging the major historical criticisms which often frame scholarly debate.
The first, as we noted, is the borrowed Constitution label. Critics argued it was a hodgepodge or patchwork lacking any indigenous genius.
But the powerful counterargument often missed is that the framers didn't blindly copy. They undertook necessary and fundamental modifications to suit India's conditions,
making the borrowed features distinctly Indian. Our integrated judiciary, our unique federal system, the balance imposed on fundamental rights, these are modifications, not mere imitations.
The Recon major critique targeted the directive principles, calling them a dustbin of sentiments, because they're not justiciable.
The response here lies in democratic theory. They were intended as a yardstick for political performance. If a government consistently ignores the DPSPs, the people have the ultimate remedy.
The ballot box.
Exactly. Electoral defeat. Their non-justiciability ensures the judiciary doesn't interfere with complex resource allocation decisions, which are rightfully in the domain of the elected executive.
And the third major line of attack focused on the Constituent Assembly itself, arguing that it was not a representative body.
Right, because its members were indirectly elected by provincial assemblies, who themselves were elected on a limited franchise, not universal adult franchise.
But while direct election was absent, the assembly was intellectually representative.
It was. It intentionally comprised representatives of all major communities and groups and contained some of the finest legal minds of the era.
And the legitimacy of the final text rests not just on the process of election, but on its broad acceptance and successful application over the last 70-plus years.
That has confirmed its capacity to function effectively as the supreme law of the land.
We've traversed the vast, detailed, and often contradictory landscape of the Indian Constitution's salient features, from the principle of parliamentary responsibility drawn from the UK to the integrated judiciary we inherited from the 1935 Act. What truly stands out is that careful synthesis.
The unique design choices that allowed the creation of a stable framework fit for a nation as massive and diverse as India.
What's fascinating here is that the Constitution is not merely a static legal text. It is a living, evolving document capable of immense flexibility.
Absolutely. Witness the dozens of amendments and judicial expansions like the definition of Article 21.
Yet it is structurally restrained by core, unamendable mechanisms like the basic structure doctrine.
And this dynamic tension, this constant balancing act between adaptation and restraint, is where the real power of the Indian polity lies. It ensures stability without stagnation.
So what does this all mean for you, the learner? Understanding these foundational features isn't just about scoring marks in an exam. It's about grasping the basic structure that holds the entire country together.
Influencing everything from the allocation of financial resources through the GST Council to the preservation of civil and political rights through judicial review.
We discussed the power of the president to dissolve the Lok Sabha and the governor's similar power, noting that the president is usually bound by ministerial advice. But consider this. In a system defined by its potential for unitary transformation and strong central executive control, how crucial are the limited and rare moments of the president's discretionary powers?
Like choosing a prime minister when no party secures a clear majority in a hung assembly.
Exactly. How crucial are those moments in maintaining the overall democratic balance? That moment of limited executive discretion is a delicate constitutional balance that is certainly worth mulling over.
A very fine point to end on.
That wraps up our deep dive for today. A humble reminder to like this video and leave a valuable comment below. Tell us which constitutional feature, the integrated judiciary or the indestructible union, you find most essential for India's stability.
And don't forget, free notes and practice PYQs are waiting for you on our Telegram channel. And if you're ready for premium preparation, check out our Legend member resources on Discord.
Thank you for joining us. Keep learning, keep questioning, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.